This is the Stephen Mansfield Podcast.
Well, welcome to the Stephen Mansfield Podcast, the podcast where we look at our times through the lens of faith and leadership, character, and history. So glad you're with me. Let's dive in. Let me say, first of all, before I get to our topic, that we're going to be answering more questions on this podcast. People have a lot of questions about their times. We want to help. So we're going to start doing entire episodes that are about questions. We're going to start answering questions perhaps at the end of a topic, or as in today, we're going to treat an entire topic because of a question. So send us your questions, and we're going to try to deal with them as directly and as quickly as we possibly can. I've been asked a question often about my own political views and about the word that I use to describe them, because I often say that I am a conservative. Now, I'm very careful to say that I am slightly right of center, not far right, but that's just to distinguish myself from everything on the far right, from neo-Nazis to extreme MAGA to other kinds of almost Nazi kinds of perspective. I don't mean to say that extreme MAGA is Nazi, by the way, but it's certainly not where I am. So I do call myself a conservative. And people have said, look, we like your politics. We don't really identify that as conservative. Why do you use that word? We probably would have gravitated to where you are earlier had you not used the word conservative, because we think of some of the nutcases in our society as conservative. Or some have said, look, conserving the past brings up slavery, brings up bigotry, brings up this and that. And of course, I recognize that that's some university misteaching sneaking in there. But I validate the question. The question is, why do I call myself a conservative? So I am happy to deal with that right now. And by the way, I'm going to end up in a bit of a lament because of reasons I think you'll understand once I have given an overview. Conservatives, by definition, are people who believe that radical social change is destabilizing social change. They are suspicious of revolutions and upheavals and radical social change, especially based on trendy and recent ideas, and tend to prefer traditional institutions, social order, and established customs. That doesn't mean there can't be change. It doesn't mean there can't be amendments to a Bill of Rights. Doesn't mean that there can't be an abolishing of slavery, things of that nature. Doesn't mean that everything from the past is brought into the present. Of course not. As a people, we learn, we evolve, we grow, we get smarter. We have great leaders who take us into new eras. So obviously, this doesn't prevent change. But I call myself a conservative because I do believe in some core, probably the best word is traditional, historic, time-tested ideas that I believe are best for society. They need to be tweaked, modified, applied by every generation, but they are the bedrock, I think, of a successful, happy, prosperous, peaceful society. What's brought misery to society is radical social change, Marxist revolutions, trendy ideas like the kinds that we see taking over today, sort of anti-tradition, by the way, I don't mind at all bringing into this the fact that I'm a Christian, so fixed, eternal kinds of historic morality, biblically based ideas are very much part of my politics, and they lead me to be a conservative. So what do I believe? I believe, for example, in limited government. Conservatives through history, Burke, others through history, other thinkers have been suspicious of large government. By the way, I believe as a historian that large governments, misguided governments, without restraints, without limitations, have brought most of the misery, second probably only to human sin, have brought most of the misery to humankind that has existed. It does not take long to survey the governments of the world to realize how much governments have brought pain and agony. 100 million people murdered in the Stalinist era of the Soviet Union. Think about that. 70 million people killed during World War II, largely because of Hitler and Mussolini and Tojo and others in Japan, the three nations that gave us, so to speak, World War II. Obviously, those nations have changed now. Two of them are some of my favorite nations. But the fact is that governments did this, misguided governments in the service of bad ideas. I could go on and on and on. Pol Pot in Cambodia. It was a government. So I'm not an anarchist. I believe in government, but misguided governments without limitations, governments without checks and balances, governments without some of the institutions that our founding fathers gave us, like separation of powers, things of that nature, have produced a massive amount of the agony in human history. Again, I would even say the Roman Empire. Very much produced some great things like most governments do, but also produced unbelievable agony. So I would say, again, that limited government's important. I believe in free markets. I am cautious to say that I believe in capitalism only because capitalism as a word is misunderstood these days. People tend to think of it as crony capitalism. They tend to think of it as backroom deals and conspiring amongst Wall Street, the Wall Street set against the American people. There's a little truth to that. But so I tend to speak in terms of free markets. I want you to be able to start a business. I want you to be able to negotiate your salary. I want you to work in a business environment that, yes, has some boundaries and is kept safe, keeps people safe and doesn't do damage, but that is allowed to thrive and prosper and serve human beings with good market services. I believe in the free market. I believe in a strong national defense. It needs to be smart. It needs to be as lean as possible, but I believe in a strong national defense. Thank God for a strong American military. For example, I realize I have a very large international audience to this podcast, but let me just talk about the American military. For the most part, the American military has been used for good in the world. It certainly has had its wrong operations and its collateral damage and its being conscripted by silly ideas coming out of Washington, D.C. But for the most part, it has. I would argue that amongst the forces that have done good in the world is the American military at its best. At its best now. And I have friends, by the way, who've been killed by friendly fire and things of that nature. I'm not lost on the potential damage that the American military or any other military can do to the innocent. But nevertheless, I'm grateful for a strong defense. Mess with us at your peril should be the attitude of almost every nation. Shouldn't impoverish its people because it's spending a great deal of money on military hardware and a military industrial complex. But if you're going to be a great people, you have to be able to defend your values, defend your people, defend your borders, etc. It's the way of nations. Okay, so strong national defense, strong emphasis on individual responsibility, individual morality, individual character, individual industry, etc. Very, very important. And so these are the reasons that I am a conservative. I am not a conservative because I want to run people's lives. I'm a conservative because I basically want a philosophy of freedom to prevail. Although all philosophies of freedom have to be checked. There have to be limited. There have to be some boundaries. There have to be laws that hem things in. There have to be boundaries. For example, the state should make sure there's a level playing field so that free markets can thrive. It's okay. That's the legitimate role of the state, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The state should be empowered to punish wrongdoers and repel invasion. The state has certain powers, but it has to be limited. It has to be there have to be boundaries, both for the free market and private life, as well as the state. That's what conservatism does. So I'm a conservative because I'm a Christian. I'm a conservative because I've studied history. I'm a conservative because I believe that we had a genius cluster that gave birth to this nation. They were blind about some things, of course, slavery and others, the role of women. But that was modifiable. They even put in place the ability to amend and change and to morph, and they spoke about those changes happening. So we've grown and we've learned. But I believe a genius cluster sort of brought together the best of the Western tradition, the best of the rule of law, the best of a philosophy of freedom, the best of a focus on free markets, the best of a government that is strong, balanced against states, decentralized, separation of powers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I believe all of those things. And my favorite quote about tradition is by Gustav Mahler, the composer. He said, "Tradition is not the worship of ashes, but the preservation of fire." I love that quote. The preservation of fire. I don't sit around worshiping the past, worshiping the dead, worshiping long dead ideas. No. I believe we've been handed a canon. We've been handed a body of beliefs. We've been handed a body of practices that have been time-honored and time-tested. And they came down through our founding fathers, and they've continued through the generations, and they have produced the most freedom in the world, where governments are checked, elections happen, powers are separated. What do I mean by that? For those of you who might be new to the idea, it means the presidency is separate from the Congress and the presidency are separate from the Supreme Court, and those at the federal level are separate from the state governments, and they can check each other, they can refuse each other, they can hold each other in check. The Supreme Court can say, "No, Mr. President, you can't do that," or Congress, "That act was unconstitutional," or the Congress can say to the president, and by the way, it should be saying it more because that's its constitutional role, these are things you cannot do. By the way, as I've said on this podcast before, the Congress can actually limit what cases the Supreme Court can hear. The Congress is meant to be the most powerful part of our federal government. So for all of these reasons, I am a conservative. I am suspicious of overreaching governments. I am suspicious of the encroachment of the state into individual liberties. I am suspicious of the encroachment of the state into the free market. I'm suspicious of the tendency of the state to intrude into religion and intrude into the church, to speak broadly of religion in general. I believe that religious freedom is sacred. And so for all of those reasons, I believe we've received not the worship of ashes, but the preservation of fire to be responsible for in our generation. And so some of you have asked, well, if you are that kind of a conservative, and we believe you are, then how do you feel about what's going on today? Well, it's always a mixed picture. And I don't speak in those terms because I can't, come to a conclusion. I've often said on this podcast, there's nothing people often say there's nothing in the middle of the road except dead skunks and yellow lines. Well, I'm not a moderate because I can't decide what I believe. I'm a moderate because my faith, my Christianity, my politics land me slightly right of center. And so as a person who leans a bit more moderate than some conservatives, I watch what's going on and I'm concerned. Many of you are going to want to know what I think of Trump. I've already said many times, I like some of the things he is doing. He is right about some things and he has handled some things well. But then because I am suspicious of and cautious about the role of the state and an overreaching state, there's no question that Donald Trump, who is not a political philosopher, not a lawyer, not a political thinker, but an entrepreneur, a man who runs his own company, and most entrepreneurs are somewhat dictatorial. That's their right. They own the company. They're deciding where it goes. That's how it works. That's the background of Donald Trump. When you get into the public sector, though, when you get into the state, when you get into the White House, you have to be hemmed in by constitutional boundaries. Otherwise, we would have dictators. And Donald Trump is doing too much from the presidency. He's overreaching. He's expanding government, whereas a conservative should be both constricting government into proper constitutional bounds and putting the proper constitutional limits and hedges and boundaries upon government. So, yeah, we we all know that he's vain and he wants to stick his name on everything, including my underwear. But we also know that he's trying to do too much. I'll do this, I'll do that, I'll order this, I'll order that. And he gets away with it because Congress is basically broken. Congress was meant to be the strong branch of government, the primary branch of government. It's very easy to see this in the writings of the Founding Fathers. But Donald Trump is a strong president. He comes along at a time when we've had a lot of weakness and a lot of duplicity and a lot of just bad executive government. And so he comes along as the strong man. People rejoice. But what he's doing is, if he's not careful, is he's creating a dictatorial track in American politics, American government. And we are all going to be regretting that, I think. So all of that to say, I like some of what Donald Trump is doing. I definitely like some of the people in his administration. I think that Marco Rubio is a fine Secretary of State. In fact, a little side comment for you. Marco Rubio's speech to the security conference, European Security Conference, was brilliant. You can find it online. It's easy to see. He was talking about the Western canon, the Western rights, Western heritage, Western culture. He complimented Europe as much of the mother of that kind of thinking as the parent of the United States. He said that Europe and the United States should be together. People stood and applauded. It was a brilliant speech, and by the way, healed some of the wounds that again, Donald Trump issued to Europe. We need Europe. We want Europe to be strong. We want it to be vital, especially, by the way, if we're trying to hem in Vladimir Putin of Russia. We need Europe. And we need Europe because we basically are all together in a certain culture and flow of ideas and history, and we should be together in it. Brilliant. So I love what Marco Rubio is doing, and I love some of our foreign policy operation. I even love some things that some people are very upset about. We needed to deal with Venezuela. No question that Venezuela was becoming a landing ground for China. Was becoming a landing ground for some other illicit nations. Russia was operating there. China was operating there. And taking out the senior leader of the leftist senior leader of Venezuela was in part to shut down Russian and Chinese incursions into our hemisphere. I think this was valid. I don't apologize for that. I think it was a good move. But there are other things that this administration has done that is a matter of overreach. And we all know that ICE took it too far. As much as illegal immigration has got to be dealt with, I could go on and on and on. But what I want to say at the heart is that I am not a conservative because I'm as somebody once jokingly said to me, old rich white guy. I'm not really any of those. I refuse to be old. I'm not thoroughly white, and I'm not doing badly financially, but I'm never going to use the word rich of myself, no matter what kind of money I have. So I enjoy the teasing and the laughing, but what I'm saying is I don't hold political values because of my own position in the world. I hold political values because I'm a Christian. I hold political values because I've read history and I understand the thinking and the reasoning of the Founding Fathers. I hold the values that I do, the political values that I do, because I think I have a sense of what works in history. I think that history, you used to study, when you used to go to university, you studied history as part of the field of moral philosophy. The idea was to study history and thus to understand how men ought to live and what works and what doesn't, and what's best for society and individuals. And I see myself as that kind of conservative. Again, not worshiping ashes, but preserving fire. And one of the things that bugs me today is that many people who would oppose the title or the name or the use of the word conservative are in fact conservatives. They just don't realize it. If you are concerned about the encroachment of the state into certain aspects of individual life, you are a conservative. That's a conservative idea. If you want laws to rule rather than individuals in a dictatorial way, you want good laws that have been thought about by smart people and voted on, that's conservative. That's conservative. If you want a strong defense in a troubled and sometimes evil world, that's a conservative idea. I could go on and on and on. And I could go through history and talk about how, again, Bev and I were watching a movie yesterday about prohibition. And the state should never have banned alcohol, for example. I don't have a particular burr under my saddle about alcohol. I'm just saying that the state getting involved at that level was foolish. It did damage. It actually, prohibition actually increased alcoholism and increased the sale of hard liquor. And all of that crafted by people who were trying either to limit alcohol consumption or smack the Germans, who were the primary beer brewers in America. I mean, it goes on and on and on with how the state should stay out of certain things, that most issues should be decided at the local level, and that traditional values should be brought to bear. I spent a lot of time on university campuses, and some of the young will come across sounding very radical, but when I tell them that really their radicalism is radical only because they're conservative ideas that have fallen a little bit out of fashion in our time, they're shocked, they're delighted, and I send them immediately to reading the great conservative canon. So I am a conservative. I am a Christian. I believe in a philosophy of freedom. I believe in traditional ideas that are strong and good for our society. And I am grieved by an overreaching president. I'm grieved by a weak Congress. I am grieved by states and state governments that won't take responsibility and hold their ground against the federal government. And I am grieved as well by a lack of understanding of the great heritage that we've had handed down to us and the obligation that we have to preserve the fire.
Stephen Mansfield is a New York Times best-selling author, a popular speaker, and a frequent faith and culture commentator in international media. His groundbreaking books on faith and society include The Faith of George W. Bush, The Search for God in Guinness, Mansfield's Book of Manly Men, and Lincoln's Battle with God. Learn more at stephenmansfield.tv.